In 2013, Adobe took software you paid $699 for, deleted the option to own it, and started charging you $600 a year instead, forever. 50,000 people signed a petition in 72 hours. Forums collapsed under the weight of rage. Designers, photographers, filmmakers, professionals who had built entire careers on Adobe's tools declared war on the company that made those tools possible. Here's what Adobe actually did. They identified that 11.5 million Creative Suite users had invested years, in some cases, entire careers, in proprietary file formats that only Adobe software could fully open, and they used that dependency as a financial weapon. In 12 years, that decision generated $12.68 billion in a single fiscal year. It also triggered a federal lawsuit, a $150 million settlement, a stock collapse of 63% from peak, and a mass exodus that is still accelerating. This is the story of how Adobe built the most profitable trap in software history, and why the walls are finally cracking. December 1982. John Warnock and Charles Geschke, two engineers who had just walked out of Xerox PARC, founded Adobe Systems in Warnock's garage in Los Altos, California. Their first product was PostScript, a programming language that told printers exactly how to render text and images. Apple licensed it for $2.5 million. That single check kept Adobe alive. 40 years later, Adobe would collect that amount from its subscribers every 43 hours. Then came Photoshop, 1990, version 1.0. Sold exclusively on Macintosh for $895. It was not an overnight explosion. It was a slow, methodical conquest. By 1994, Photoshop was the industry standard for image editing. By 2000, Adobe's annual revenue crossed $1.2 billion. If you were working in design, photography, or video in the 1990s or early 2000s, you know exactly what came next. Adobe assembled the most dominant creative software portfolio in history. Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Premiere Pro, After Effects, Audition, Dreamweaver, all of it bundled into the Creative Suite. Creative Suite 6, launched in April 2012, was the peak of that era. The Master Collection, every single Adobe application, sold for $2,599. One time, you owned it. You could run it on Windows XP, Windows 7, whatever you had. No internet required, no monthly invoice, no permission slip from Adobe to open your own files. Adobe's revenue in fiscal year 2012 was $4.4 billion, stable, profitable, but not the kind of number that makes Wall Street stand up, and that was the problem, at least from the perspective of the people running the company. Adobe had 11 million people who couldn't leave. The only question was whether those people knew it yet. By early 2013, Adobe controlled the creative software market with a grip that had no historical parallel. Photoshop wasn't just a product, it was a verb. Illustrator was the default for every logo, every brand identity, every piece of vector art produced professionally on Earth. Premiere Pro had displaced Final Cut Pro as the editor of choice after Apple's catastrophic Final Cut X relaunch. After Effects was the standard for motion graphics across every major film studio, every broadcast network, every production house with a budget. Adobe's stock had climbed from $17 in 2009 to $42 by mid-2013, a 147.0% increase in 4 years. Photoshop had been installed on an estimated 90% of professional design workstations globally, and Shantanu Narayen, Adobe's CEO since 2007, knew exactly what that dominance was worth. At Adobe Max 2013, standing in front of thousands of the company's most loyal users, he declared it plainly, "There will be no Creative Suite 7. Not a question, not a proposal, a declaration." What they told you was this: Creative Cloud was an upgrade, continuous updates, cloud storage, collaboration tools, better value for professionals who needed the latest features. What they actually did was eliminate the exit. If you wanted to keep using the newest version of Photoshop, the version that supported the latest file formats, the latest hardware, the latest operating systems, you had to subscribe. And if you stopped subscribing, you didn't just lose access to new features, you lost access to your own files. Think about what that actually means. Every PSD file you ever saved, every layered Illustrator document, every Premiere project, all of it, readable only by software you no longer owned. They didn't lock your data in a vault. They built the vault around data you already had. They didn't just sell you software, they built a cage out of file formats and called it a cloud. If you've ever felt like a company had you exactly where they wanted you and there was nothing you could do about it, subscribe. Because what comes next is the moment Adobe found out there are consequences, and they are still paying them. May 6th, 2013. The exact date. Adobe detonated its relationship with the creative community. The announcement was surgical in its precision and catastrophic in its execution. Adobe would discontinue all future perpetual license sales of Creative Suite. Creative Cloud, $49.99 per month for the full suite, $599.88 per year, would be the only path forward. Single applications like Photoshop would run $20.99 per month. The photography plan, Photoshop plus Lightroom, would eventually settle at $9.99 per month. Adobe converted a one-time capital expenditure into a permanent operating expense, then made that expense non-negotiable by controlling the file formats their users depended on. What they told you: Creative Cloud gives you access to all of Adobe's apps, always up to date, with 20 gigabytes of cloud storage and new features every month. It's the best value in Adobe's history. What they actually did, they calculated that 11.5 million existing Creative Suite users had invested years, in some cases, entire careers, in Adobe's proprietary file formats. Formats that competing software could only partially read. Formats that represented millions of hours of professional work. And they used that dependency as a financial weapon. Within 72 hours of the announcement, a Change.org petition titled "Tell Adobe No to Creative Cloud as the Only Option" had collected 50,000 signatures. Designer forums erupted. Reddit threads ran for thousands of comments. David Blattner, a publishing consultant and InDesign expert with 25 years in the industry, confessed publicly, "I feel like Adobe has broken a trust with its users. This isn't about the money, it's about the principle that you can own something." But Adobe's CFO Mark Garrett declared to investors in a June 2013 earnings call, "The transition to Creative Cloud is going exactly as planned. We are very pleased with the pace of adoption." Exactly as planned. Picture this: a freelance photographer named Marcus Webb, based in Portland, Oregon, who had purchased Photoshop CS5 in 2010 for $699 and used it every single day for 3 years. In May 2013, he opened his laptop, read the announcement, and did the math. At $9.99 per month for the photography plan, he would pay $119.88 per year. In 6 years, he would have spent more than his original purchase price and own nothing. Cancel the subscription, and his entire archive of layered PSD files becomes a collection of locked boxes. He subscribed anyway, because there was no alternative. That was the trap. Not the price, the architecture, but the financial extraction was nothing compared to what Adobe did next when users tried to leave. The backlash didn't kill Adobe. It made them richer. That is the most devastating part of this story. In fiscal year 2013, Adobe's revenue was $4.05 billion, slightly down from 2012 as the transition disrupted short-term sales. By fiscal year 2015, revenue had climbed to $4.79 billion. By 2017, $7.30 billion. By 2019, $11.17 billion. By 2024, $21.5 billion. The subscription model didn't just work, it compounded, but the consequences were accumulating in parallel, invisible to the quarterly earnings reports. Canva launched in 2013. The same year, Adobe went subscription only. Canva didn't appear by accident. It appeared because Adobe handed them the market. The millions of small business owners, marketers, and casual designers who had previously used Adobe products, but could no longer justify $600 per year for tools they used occasionally. By 2024, Canva had 190 million monthly active users. 190 million people who chose not to give Adobe a single dollar. Affinity Photo launched in 2015, Affinity Designer in 2014, Affinity Publisher in 2019. all of them one-time purchases, all of them explicitly marketed as the answer to Adobe's subscription model. By 2022, Affinity had sold over 3 million licenses. Then Canva acquired Affinity, two of Adobe's most dangerous competitors merging into a single entity. DaVinci Resolve, free. Figma, free tier. Then the target of a $20 billion acquisition Adobe would never complete. Sketch, $99 per year versus Adobe's $600. The exodus was not dramatic. It was methodical. Professional designers quietly switching tools, one project at a time, one frustration at a time. Then came the moment that exposed the full architecture of Adobe's trap. In June 2024, the United States Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission filed a lawsuit against Adobe Inc. The charge: that Adobe had deliberately hidden early termination fees as high as 50% of the remaining annual contract value, in fine print during the sign-up process. That Adobe had engineered a cancellation flow so convoluted, so deliberately obstructive, that users who tried to leave were subjected to multiple screens, retention offers, warnings, and delays designed to exhaust their will to exit. The government called it a dark pattern. In March 2026, Adobe settled for $150 million, $75 million in civil penalties paid to the DOJ, $75 million in free services distributed to affected customers. The company that built the tools of creativity had been caught engineering the architecture of captivity. 37 million subscribers were still paying, but the government had been watching, and they had receipts. The numbers don't lie. Adobe's stock price in October 2021, $699.54. The same number, almost to the dollar, as the original retail price of Photoshop CS6, a coincidence that feels like a verdict. By 2026, Adobe's stock had collapsed 63.0% from that peak, trading near $258, a number that would have been unthinkable 4 years earlier. 5 metrics that tell the complete story. 1. Revenue growth rate, 23% in 2021, 10% in 2024. Decelerating every single year as the subscription base saturates and competitors absorb new users before Adobe can capture them. 2. Price to earnings ratio, 40 times in 2021, 15 times in 2026. Wall Street has repriced Adobe from a growth company to a value trap. 3. The Figma acquisition, $20 billion. The amount Adobe agreed to pay in September 2022 to acquire Figma, the collaborative design tool that had captured 80% of the screen design market. The amount Adobe lost when the deal collapsed on December 18, 2023, under pressure from the UK Competition and Markets Authority, the European Commission, and the US Department of Justice. Adobe paid Figma a $1 billion termination fee. $1 billion for nothing. 4. The DOJ settlement, $150 million paid in March 2026 to resolve allegations that Adobe had deliberately trapped users through hidden fees and engineered cancellation barriers. The government didn't just fine them, they mandated that Adobe redesign its cancellation process to be simple. 5. Canva's last reported valuation, $49 billion in 2024, made it worth more than Adobe's entire market capitalization at current trading prices. A company that didn't exist before Adobe's subscription announcement is now worth more than Adobe itself. The irony is surgical. Adobe's subscription model generated $21.5 billion in fiscal year 2024. It also generated 190 million Canva users, 3 million Affinity licenses, a federal lawsuit, a $150 million settlement, and a $1 billion termination fee on a deal that never closed. They won the financial model. They may be losing the war. In March 2026, Shantanu Narayen, the CEO who stood on stage in 2013 and declared there would be no Creative Suite 7, announced his retirement after 18 years. He leaves behind a business generating record revenue and hemorrhaging relevance simultaneously. The question isn't whether Adobe survives. The question is whether it deserves to. Here's what the story of Adobe actually teaches us. Lesson 1. Dependency is not loyalty. Adobe confused the two for over a decade. They looked at 11.5 million Creative Suite users locked into proprietary file formats and called it a customer base. It was a pressure cooker. The moment a credible alternative appeared, and Canva, Affinity, and Figma all appeared, the pressure released. Loyalty is built through value. Dependency is built through architecture. The market eventually distinguishes between them. Lesson 2. The trap you build for your customers becomes the trap you build for yourself. Adobe's cancellation dark patterns didn't just frustrate users. They generated a federal lawsuit, a $150 million settlement, mandatory injunctions, and a reputational catastrophe that no marketing budget can repair. Every friction point you engineer into your exit flow is a future headline. Lesson 3. The company that controls the tools controls the culture, until it doesn't. Adobe controlled creative culture for 30 years because its tools were genuinely the best. The moment the subscription model made good enough alternatives economically rational, 190 million people chose good enough. Culture follows value, not legacy. Here's what this story actually comes down to. When Adobe announced the end of Creative Suite in May 2013, they were betting on something specific. They were betting that you, the designer, the photographer, the filmmaker, the creative professional, were too dependent, too invested, too locked in to ever leave. If you switched to Canva, to Affinity, to Figma, to DaVinci Resolve, you were right. Adobe bet that you would stay. They were wrong. What's the tool you switched to, or the one you're thinking about switching to right now? Tell